In this episode, you'll discover the 2 essential calls you need to motivate your crew.
Feel the grip of the oar handle, smooth yet firm in your hands. Taste the salt of your own sweat and the occasional splash of water. It's all part of the journey. Welcome to another episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Each week, our host, Masters rowing coach Rebecca Caro, dives deep into the world of Masters rowing. Whether you're on the water or in the gym, join us to become a faster master. Let's go rowing.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. It's good to be back. I'm Rebecca Caro and today we're talking about coxing your first race. This episode came about because someone approached me and said, frankly, I'm scared witless. I've got to go and cox this race and I really don't know what I should be doing. And in writing my answer to them, I came up with a broad formula which I hope you will find useful. Let's start with what is expected of you. When you're coxing, you're obviously going to be steering the boat. So the first thing you have to be able to do is to guide the boat carefully around the course using the best possible route that you can. There will be hazards and obstacles, for example, overhanging trees, bridges that you have to go around, corners, and it's your job to try and take the straightest route possible. And then when you have to steer, to take as tight a turn as you can within the margins of not disrupting the crew rhythm. Now that's hard and takes a bit of practice. I'm sincerely hoping that your first race will actually be on a waterway that you already know, so that you already have time to practice that. But if you don't, look at the river as if it were a road and you were driving or riding a bicycle. You want to be, generally speaking, with the stream. If you're in a stream river, going with the stream, you want to be usually plumb in the middle of the river. And the way to work that out is to look to your right and your left and to look at the distance between the tip of the blades on that side and the shoreline, and then look the other way and see if it looks as if they're roughly similar. So on any straight bit, that is probably going to be a good course. I caveat there because there are often things that are under the water that the locals may know about that you may not know about. But for a rule of thumb, that generally works. When it comes to corners, it's a little different. Water flows in a straight line. And what it does is it'll go in a straight line and it'll bounce off the bank to go around a corner. It doesn't actually usually generally curve around. It's lots of little straight lines and corrections. So if you're going around a corner that's turning towards your right-hand side as you are steering, what will generally happen is the deeper water is on your left-hand side and the river scours out the riverbank. You'll often see the bank is deeper and steeper on that side. And on the other side, the underlying land is actually much, much, much more shallow, a sort of a slip-off bank and an undercut cliff. What happens here is the fastest water then is closer to the cliff, to the left-hand side, even though you're turning to the right. So you'll be coming off the end of the straight and you can see the bend starting. And what you do is you start to drift your boat a little to the left-hand side and then take a sweep around that corner, probably 1/3 of the way closer to the left-hand bank. So you can look to your left and you'll see 1/3 of the river from the tip of the blade to the bank. And to your right, you'll see 2/3 of the river. After the bend has ended, you need to go back into the middle of the river. Now, if you are racing against the stream, it is the opposite advice. You need to hug the bank close enough that you're getting into water that doesn't have stream coming against you. And that's a much harder job, but again, a rule of thumb of thirds works quite well there. So the steering part of the coxing is probably something you won't have problems with. If you're a coxswain, you know how to steer your boat. But what you have to do is motivate the crew. And I start off by recommending that you have 2 essential calls. One of these calls is going to be a technical call, and one of them is going to be about pressure, working harder. Okay. What you choose is up to you. Now, in practice, you should be able to work with the crew to find out what motivates them and what they are skilled at doing. So I don't know the skill of your crew, but let's take the pressure call first. You might call for a pressure 10. They spend 10 strokes working hard. That's a good call to make, which will increase your boat speed for 10 strokes. And if the crew can do that well, that is great. Your job then is to work out how to choose the right technique call that supports the pressure call. Because you can make the boat go faster if you row better with good technique. So speak with your coach, speak with the crew. What are the aspects of the stroke that they feel they become lazy about or are harder to do when they're tired? And agree with them what the technique call will be. So it might be early catches. It might be a strong leg drive. There are many options for you to choose from, but you only need one. And then the way you deliver those 2 calls in the race is you put them in combination. So you could do technique first, followed by pressure, or you could do pressure first, followed by technique. And this changes it up, gives variation. What happens in the race is if you do the technique call first, you get them to improve their technique over a 10-stroke period. The boat starts to go a little quicker. It runs a little better because they're rowing better. And then you follow that up with a pressure call. And what you're hoping is that they hold on to the technical change while they're also doing the pressure. Now, what can happen is you find that when they do the pressure call, they forget about the technique, which is why I suggested doing the alternative, which is pressure first. Let's get the boat up and running. And then the technique call. Let's try and maintain that higher boat speed using good technique and being a little more efficient in our movements. So you can see the difference effect that those 2 calls can have in combination and when used in different ones first. Now, it's really important you practice this in training so that the crew knows what you are likely to be doing, so that they are prepared and they understand the nuance of what I've just described as to why you're choosing these things and the order in which you get them to do them. When do you use these 2 essential calls in your race? In general, landmarks on the race course are a good place to do them. Landmarks could be you're going past a church, there's a particular building that's noticeable, it's a bend in the river or a bridge. So those are the sorts of things I mean by landmarks. Now, if the landmark involves a steering change, you're going to change course, it's really important to do the call before you start the steering, so that you get the boat speed up before you start to steer, because when you steer, the boat will slow down. Every time you do a tiny change on the rudder, the boat slows down. So you get a little bit of increased boat speed before you have to steer, and then you make the steering maneuver, and then as you have finished the steering maneuver or you're going past the landmark, you then do another call as you're straight and going on to the next bit of the race course. So I have a preference for pushing in and out of landmarks. And what I will often do is make it a 20, not a 10, so that I do the technique 10 first, get my boat running better, then do a 10 pressure to increase the boat speed as I'm coming into the landmark. I then do my best to navigate past the landmark if it's a straight line thing or if it involves steering, to do the steering maneuver. And as I see the landmark going past me, so imagine there's a bridge that's overhead and you can lift your chin and all the athletes can see the bridge, you then push away from the bridge and they can see it receding into the distance. So that's a nice motivation in itself. Now, in terms of the big picture of the race, my advice to you is to divide it into quarters by distance approximately, and know what is the beginning and end of each quarter. Now, you could choose time rather than distance. It's a 20-minute race. We've got 4 lots of 5 minutes. If you do that, just know when those quarters begin and end, and have a focus for each of the quarters, so that the first quarter is about getting off the start and getting into your race rhythm. The second quarter is about maintaining your boat speed and getting the boat running well and the crew moving efficiently. The third quarter is about being hard on your competitors. Make it difficult for them to go faster than you. And this is where the crew focuses internally and they are getting tired. So this is where you may need a lot more of the pushes to keep the boat speed up. And then the fourth quarter is moving towards the finish line and what you're going to do in terms of that part of the race. And as you think about it, I like to list all the landmarks in each of the quarters, but also recognize that there may be other things that happen. So you might be overtaking a crew, you might be being overtaken by a crew. You might be able to do the thing that they call walking, where if you're side by side with another crew, you can look across and you can see which member of the crew you are level with. So you can say, I'm level with Cox, give me their stroke seat. And you call for a push, the same push that you practiced in training. And that push hopefully will advance your crew a little. You can look across again and go, I'm level with the stroke seat. Give me 7, give me 6, and help the crew through that maneuver. It's a different sort of landmark, because of course it's a moving landmark of a competitor. But the inverse is also true. If you are being overtaken, try to hold on to the crew for as long as you can. Do a push as you can see them approaching. Now, if you're in a front loader or a stern loader Coxer seat, you need your bowman or your stroke person to tell you what's happening behind you that you can't see. So they need to be able to say, crew coming up, you know, on bow side or stroke side, port or starboard, so that you know. You can then obviously take a little look. If you're in a front loader, you might want one of those rear view mirrors on your cap so that you can lean your head and use the mirror to see them. But try and hold on to that crew as they go past you and raise the average speed of your crew. Which brings me to the last point. I think of speed in a race as a horizontal line. Ideally, you do a racing start and you come down onto your race pace, and then you have a horizontal line, and that is the optimal speed that your crew can do throughout the whole race. However, things happen that disrupt it. And so what happens is you drop below your horizontal line, and that might be because of inaccuracies in technique, or it might be the crew gets tired and they stop pushing as hard, or it might be that you're going around a corner and the boat slows. It's going to slow because you're steering. And your job is to take them from that low point back up to the horizontal line. And you can do that in 2 ways, as we talked about earlier. Your 2 essential calls, 1 technical, 1 pressure. And your job is to try and keep the crew, through your verbal encouragement, to as close as possible to the horizontal line speed that they are capable of. It's a challenge. It's really hard to do, but a good coxswain can really encourage and motivate the crew. Do not feel you have to talk all the time. A little bit of silence for 5 or 10 strokes means that when you next say something, the crew is very focused and attentive to what you're saying. Because you have not said something for a while, it gives them greater clarity of purpose on the words that you're actually saying. A coxswain that endlessly talks is a distraction. And what you will find is that if you call one thing and then a couple of strokes later call another thing, the crew forgets about doing the first thing and try to do what you're asking them, and they move on to the second thing. So it's really important that you give them usually at least 10 strokes to do the thing that you first asked for. And that thing could be one of your 2 calls, or it could be just a focus on a landmark or a time. We're coming up to 5 minutes gone. On the next one, that's 5 minutes now. And then stay silent for 10 strokes. So they're really focusing on moving through that 5-minute marker before you say the next thing. Now, it is important as a coxswain that you're able to judge how many strokes it takes the crew to cover a certain distance. And this is something you can practice on your home waters. Take a look at a landmark, a buoy or a tree or something, and in your head think, right, from here, I think it's 8 strokes at the pressure they're doing right now, at the stroke rate they're doing right now. It doesn't matter what that is. That could be light pressure, it could be firm pressure, it could be high or low rate. And then count the strokes in your head and see if you were right. It's a bit like driving a car and knowing how fast you are going and how fast you close on the car in front, for example, when you're coming up to traffic lights. You need to acquire that knowledge so that you can be really accurate in deciding, for example, if you're coming up to a landmark, when to start the essential call that you're going to do leading into the landmark. So that's something you can train yourself on. And it comes particularly in useful when you're doing the finishing sprint, because you will probably see the finish line first. And telling them that you can see the finish line is a good thing, but you need to be able to say to them, I can see the finish line and we've got 40 strokes to go. So the crew knows what sort of distance and what sort of effort and endeavour they need to put in. So I hope that's been useful, and please give me some feedback on how coxing your first race went.
We are part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your fellow rowers about the show. If you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.